Hi, welcome to section 2, Modern Storytellers. I've always thought that being a presenter was more like being a storyteller than being a salesperson or being a marketer, just because when you are on stage, when you are in front of a room, it really evokes those traditions of storytelling that you see in a lot of cultures that have oral traditions. You have to have something that is engaging for people to talk about. You have to get them pulled into your story so that they're paying attention. Now, if you look at some of those oral traditions or any storytelling that has happened in just about any culture on the planet, we have these storytelling traditions that had a reason for those stories. Let's just take Western fairy tales just for a moment. And we'll talk about how many of them were designed to frighten children into not wandering away from home. Don't go too far into the forest. Don't go too close to the water. Don't go anywhere that might be dangerous, because this is a way that elders would encourage or persuade children to stay where that safety is. So they would tell them a story that would scare them into thinking that there was danger. And there was legitimate danger, so it had a point. So as storytellers, we have to think the same way. We have to think that our audience is there for a reason, and we have a reason to be there with our audience. So we have to figure out what that is, and we have to create content and deliver the content in such a way that convinces them that they need to take that step that we have already determined they need to take. So our audience is important. Obviously, if you're telling stories to children, you have a certain goal in mind, and that is to teach them a lesson, keep them safe, give them the moral of a story. But if you are speaking to a business audience, then you might have something more concrete. You want them to sign up for a service. You want them to tune in to your next webinar or whatever that is. So you have a reason to be in front of them, and you know what you want them to do. How do we get them to do it? What is the most effective content and the most effective delivery to get them to take that next step? And that is what so much of the decision making around creating a presentation should center on. So as you're talking about the different content that needs to go in, you need to think to yourself, does that further my goal? And if it does not, then it's something you can cut. It's something you can provide as a handout. So once you know who they are and once you know what you want them to do, then you can decide what you want them to know. But you want to make sure that it's tailored towards that end goal. So that end goal can be something really specific. It can be something like, I want them to take this information and energy over what I'm talking about home to back to work to their decision makers and convince them that this is a direction they want their business to go. Or it could be very specific. I want them to sign up for swimming lessons at my organization. And I want them to know then that the swimming lessons are safe, that we are accredited, that we follow a specific program that is proven to help people learn to swim. So you have a very specific goal, and then you can decide what information they need to know. You can also use a variety of persuasion techniques. Now, I actually have an entire course on persuasion for presenters. Persuasion gets a bad rap for a lot of us. We think about persuasion in terms of, when we were younger, our parents might say, I don't like that person, has too much influence over you. They're persuading you to do things that you normally wouldn't do. We think about it in terms of salespeople that are trying to convince us to buy a car we really don't want, or a timeshare that we weren't really that excited about. Has anybody here been to a timeshare presentation? I actually really love them because I am excited to see somebody else give a presentation. It's a really easy start to give a timeshare presentation because they always come in and they're like, isn't this great? This vacation you're on is fantastic. And so you think to yourself, it is. Wow, I really like it. But then they have to convince you, on top of the money you spent for that vacation that you're on, to spend more money to have that vacation in the future, multiple times. Sometimes it's the same vacation. So if you are in that presentation, they're trying to show you how much fun everything is, and then if you want to have a discount in the future and everything to do it again, that timeshare would be a great idea. sometimes it's a little hard to get out of that room. So that's why we think persuasion, they're trying to persuade me. But it's not a bad thing. We persuade people every day. We have discussions about what area we think is best to move a company or to move a department or a product that we're working on. And we persuade people every day in a good way. And that's what, as a presenter, you want to focus on. So there are persuasion theories out there, persuasion techniques that can make your job just a little bit easier. I already talked about storytelling. I feel like we're all storytellers up there. But specifically, storytelling in a presentation can draw in that audience, can make it personal. So recently, I bought a new used car. And while I was in the process of buying that car, I got into conversation with a salesperson about their own process when they were just buying a car. And he was a very young guy, really, really young. And he talked to me about his decision-making process and the things that were important to him as he was buying this car, and why he actually decided to go with a different brand than the one he was actually selling. And that story did the same thing to me that stories will do for your audience. It connects you to the person. It makes you feel comfortable because they're just another person doing the same thing that you do, thinking the same things that you think about the subject. So you have that immediate connection. So storytelling is a great way to do that. Something that you'll see a lot in presentation videos, presentation trainings, is repetition. Now, you never want to use repetition to the point where it becomes irritating to your audience, but you can do it in a more subtle way. You don't have to necessarily repeat yourself exactly word for word, but you can keep bringing back some of that information to connect the dots for people. In terms of blending storytelling and repetition, a really great way to have a presentation is to tell a story, kind of in an intro, and then make sure you refer back to that story throughout your presentation. So if you have a story or analogy, we'll just take my buying a car, for instance, and then I can refer back to that. So when I talk about repetition, I can talk about the various points in that sales process that we went back to his car, and maybe how the car that I was buying had some advantages, things like that. Specificity. So if you want to make sure that you don't have that audience walking away feeling like, wow, that was a sales pitch. I wasn't feeling it. I felt like they were just trying to sell it to me. Now, many years ago, I had a boss who insisted that we not show the software we were selling. And that was really hard. I couldn't be really specific about what I was trying to describe to people. So it ended up being very vague, and people walked away and they left me feedback like, no, that was really salesy. Well, it was because I wasn't able to be specific. I wasn't able to say, you have a problem and I know what it is and here's how I'm going to fix it without the proof. I couldn't prove it. So specificity is something that will really help you get to that persuasion point, because they're not going to feel like they're just being fed some vague stories, vague lines. Authenticity is another thing. So stories help you with that. People like when things seem authentic. They don't want something to seem recycled. They don't want it to seem manufactured. So even if you are giving a corporate presentation where you have slides that somebody else created, if you bring yourself to that presentation, you tell them a story that they can relate to, always make sure it's a story they can relate to, then you're going to bring that authenticity to those slides, which is huge. And it will really help with that audience engagement. And social proof. So as a software technical evangelist, what I would frequently do is I would use success stories. I would say like, hey, look at all these great people that have done the same thing, and testimonials and things like that will do the same thing. So these are some ways you can get started with persuasion. Think about how you can bring them into your presentation so that it will just enhance your goal and the content that is furthering your goal. But again, I have an entire course on persuasion for presenters, and you can check that out for a little more information. So our next section is going to be talking about how you're going to be structuring your presentation. So structure is really important. We're going to start with, how you want to start off, how you want to move through the process of creating a presentation. But first, it's important to know some ways that are tried and true to structure that presentation. So tune in for part 3, structure techniques, just after this.